Welcome, one and all, to the Hammer Territory Podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Always a pleasure to be with you with my podcast partner, Stephen Tolbert. Stephen, hey, you talk about it consistently and for good reason. We're at that time of year. March Madness is beginning. And, so far, it's been fun to see some of these college basketball games. But good to talk with you as always, Stephen. Another thing about it is, man, we are 2 weeks away from the start of the season for the Braves. And today we're going to talk about some questions that we had coming into spring training. Where do we kind of stand with those? But Stephen, before we get into those details, how are you, sir? Good evening to you.
Shawn, what's up, brother? Yeah, man. 2 weeks less, right at 2 weeks. Today's Thursday. We're recording on Thursday night. I think the opening day of the season is Thursday. I think we're right at 2 weeks. It's coming fast. We say that spring training does drag on. There's always storylines to talk about, which is what we're going to focus tonight, basically, is kind of the spring storylines that we had at the beginning and where they stand. But we're coming up on it. It's going to be here before you know it. And I just can't wait. I'm every year at this time, I fall in love with baseball all over again. You watch spring training highlights, you see the guys, the bat and the ball, the sounds of the game. I'm just addicted to it. I love it so much. And so I can't wait to get started. But yeah, we got some interesting things to talk about tonight. There's some things going on in camp that are not settled by any means. And, how important they are is probably a case by case thing, but we're going to talk about it tonight.
Yeah, and I think that settled is a very good way of putting it because, we'll just kind of give away, what we're going to get at. We'll go ahead and provide you with the conclusion that we're going to come to through talking through a few of these spring training storylines at the beginning. The conclusion is that there were several questions that the Braves came into spring training that remain unanswered. More questions than many of us had thought would still be remaining when we looked earlier in the offseason, and certainly more questions that were left unanswered when you compared to where we were as a team back last year or even the past 2 or 3 years. And the simple truth is, those questions remain as we're now in the midst of spring training, and it's a bit unsettling that it's gotten a bit louder. Because what became clear with each and every day that we went without some type of notable addition to this squad in an area of need, the Braves were looking for internal improvement. They were looking for internal options to emerge to help answer some of these questions. Those internal options, yeah, you can name them, but they haven't answered the questions, in my opinion. And when we talk about that we're settling in to spring training, settling in leading up to the season, the fact that those questions remain, Stephen, is what probably is the most unsettling thing about this spring training. I'll stop trying to use all these fancy words. The point that I'm getting at is the same questions that we had a month ago remain now, and the fact that they're louder, it doesn't give the best of confidence when it comes to going into the season.
I mean, yeah, that's where we are right now. I mean, the easiest place to start is the bullpen, right? I mean, we said for 4 months that we were surprised the Braves haven't added anything significant to the bullpen because of what they lost, right? They lost Joe Jimenez, they lost AJ Minter, Jesse Chavez moved on. And we just kept waiting and waiting and waiting for them to add a significant high leverage reliever. That still has not happened as of yet. And what they did instead was they went with this kind of army of, non-roster invitee, non-guaranteed money guys who are on minor league deals, and basically just kind of threw numbers at the problem and said, instead of going with quality, go and get a really high expensive guy on the free agent market, we're gonna throw quantity at the problem and just see if we can catch lightning in a bottle with one of these guys. And Anderson Pilar and Angel Perdomo were kind of two of the guys that everybody has been saying, no, these two guys are for real. Just wait until we get to spring and you'll see how real they are. Well, I mean, here we are 2 weeks in the spring, and Angel Perdomo and Anderson Pilar don't look that great, to be honest. I think they were hoping Perdomo's stuff would be a little bigger than it's been. He had such massive strikeout numbers with Pittsburgh before he got hurt. You just really haven't seen that. I think he's got 3 strikeouts on the entire spring. Anderson Pilar has had really good strikeout numbers. but he's given up a million. I mean, 1 trillion base runners. He pitched today against the Phillies, and it did not go well at all. He got rocked. I think he gave up a cycle in like the first 4 outs that he got. I think he gave up the cycle. So, those are the two of the big guys, and then you have all the NRI guys. And Jake Diekman has not looked. He's looked average. Buck Farmer had a bad day today. He's had a couple of bad outings. Days Bell has been okay. Nothing great. Like we just don't have any answers. And you and I have talked about this before about there's just a few more questions that I'm comfortable with at the moment, especially around the pitching staff. And we'll get to the back end of the rotation in a minute. But the bullpen, I think, has to lead this off because this is the area where they did not add. They lost a lot and they did not add outside of, a bunch of minor league guys. And they were really counting on Perdomo and Pilar, I think, to be better than they've been. And, if you read Bowman's piece the other day, I think he came out yesterday about his projections. He didn't have Perdomo or Pilar on his opening day bullpen projection. And there's a lot of people who don't right now have them because they haven't looked good. And so what happens? Like, are they just going to go with like 4 of these NRI guys? Are they going to, we still haven't seen Hector Neris. Buck Farmer has not looked great. Like, I don't know. I don't know if you have an opinion. I don't know what they're going to do. Like, I mean, David Robertson is still out there technically. And there's obviously always trades, but like if you look at the names and the performances in-house in spring so far, I have a lot of questions. And we were kind of hoping by now we would have a few more answers, and we just don't. And I think if you got Alex Anthopoulos in an honest moment, he would tell you they were hoping they would have more answers by now, or at least guys that look better that could at least be projectable for the opening day roster and then, early in the season before you can make trades. So I don't know. I don't know what you think, but I have specifically around the bullpen, I still have the exact same number of questions I had when we started.
So I've been on record of saying when it comes to the bullpen, I haven't been as worried about the bullpen, in the past when I talked about it, because that's one area where Alex Anthopoulos has shown when I say he's a master of the move on the margins, probably the one area that he is beyond, getting guys who are underperforming offensively and bringing them to Atlanta and they can, get back to where, they were, at good points of their career previously. He's done that before, with bullpen guys, being able to trade for guys. I mean, Joe Jimenez, Pierce Johnson, Aaron Bummer are all examples of that. But that's mid-season, or, in the case of Bummer, it was the offseason, and Joe Jimenez as well. But that's what he's done. He's been able to go get guys who've underperformed and come here and have done better. But you haven't seen that be at the first of spring training. It's a little bit harder to do that, I feel, at the first of spring training. And the other thing that kind of stands out to me, Stephen, is that with how much Alex Anthopoulos has spent on the bullpen in the past and how much he's put emphasis on having depth in his bullpen in the past, the fact that we have neither one of those things where you question the quality of the back end of the bullpen plus the depth overall, that to me is the biggest indicator as to while they may not speak to it, there is limitations right now when it comes to what they can add financially. The fact that they have not gone out and got more security, more certainty for the bullpen is what basically makes me think that that is a legit question, because the legit answer is that they do have restrictions. So I don't necessarily know if that's going to be a hindrance going into the season. And I feel that Alex Anthopoulos certainly can, structure this bullpen as we go along. But you've already got questions about the back end of your rotation, which we're about to get into. If those guys struggle, you've got to rely heavily on your bullpen to start the season, but you can't rely on your bullpen because it's uncertain. Then you're getting into a slippery slope here where quickly you could find yourself with one, with a pretty bad pitching situation, and that could really hurt you when you need to get off to a good start for the season.
Yeah, listen, I mean, Iglesias and Bummer and Dylan Lee and Pierce Johnson could come out in the first month and just be lights out, right? And the Braves barely noticed the back end of their bullpen. But it's hard to say right now that there's any confidence. There are people that don't have confidence in Aaron Bummer. There are people that don't have confidence in Pierce Johnson. Like I probably have a little more confidence. Like I think the top four is good. or at least it can be good. It also it can be bad too. That's how bullpens work. But the next four, I'm not as big a believer in Days Bell as a lot of other people are. I might be wrong. He could be awesome. I'm just not there yet. And I haven't seen anything from any of these other guys to give me any level of confidence. And how much that hurts the Braves is going to be dependent on how much they need these guys. Like you just said, you can go through stretches where your starters are doing really well and you're only using like your top 4 or 5 relievers for a stretch because the offense is kicking butt. The starters are doing great and you don't really need it. You can also go through stretches where you have multiple starters only go 3 innings and now you got to cover a bunch of bulk innings. Well, now you got to use the other guys and it can get, dicey quick. So I am still stunned. I mean, I'm going to be just completely honest. I'm still stunned that this is the group of pitchers we have in camp. I've said it all offseason. I thought they would add to the bullpen. I thought they would add to the rotation. I'm frankly stunned that they haven't. I thought there was very clear need. I think they tried. We got reports about Jeff Hoffman and other stuff. I do think they tried, but obviously you get judged on the results and obviously they haven't had anything significant. And I'm stunned by that. I really am. I still can't believe when I look at the names, when Bowman puts out his projection and I look at the names in the bullpen, I can't believe those are the names. And, every time I watch Ian Anderson pitch, I can't believe that he's going to start for the Braves. Probably we'll get to that in a second, but that's kind of where we are. And the top end of this roster might be so good that it protects them from this stuff, or they could really pay for it. We'll just have to see how it goes when the season starts. But the bullpen specifically is an area where I'm just as concerned as I was when spring training started, where I thought they needed another arm, and I still think that.
Yeah, and I think the easy way to look at this is that, this team is just one more injury away from being in a really concerning spot with its pitching staff. If one of our, if Sell or Schwellenbach or Ronaldo Lopez get hurt, or Iglesias or Purvis Johnson or Bummer get hurt, that puts us in a even more unsettling situation. A situation in which it, again, really, I'm not going to use the word dire, but it really could put us in a concerning spot when it comes to the reliability of our pitching staff. And that's what stands out to me, especially when you consider the fact the lack of luck that we've had on the injury side of things over the past few years. And again, when Steven says that he's stunned that we've not added to the bullpen, it's not to be dramatic. It's not just to, he's not just saying that on a whim. The real reason why he's stunned is because, again, of how much emphasis Alex Anthopoulos, how much money he's spent on having a quality bullpen in the past. But that, to me, also is what stands out, is that when we talk about these questions remaining and them getting louder in spring training, there's another statement that gets louder as well. This team, unfortunately, is one injury away to where, especially to the pitching staff, they could really, really be struggling to find reliable arms, and you don't want to be in that position to start the season.
Right, exactly. And listen, I don't want to paint too dire of a picture. Again, there's a conversion of the 2025 first couple of months of the season where this doesn't hurt the Braves at all. I mean, if Spencer Strider comes back and Sale and Schwellenbach and Lopez and all the guys look great, and the back end guys of the bullpen, Iglesias and Bummer and Lee all look great, this might not affect them at all. This might not matter at all. There's a real possibility that that's what happens. The top end talent of this team is still very high. But, the way my brain works is I'm always thinking about, well, what happens if if this goes wrong, if one thing goes wrong, what happens? And I don't feel terribly secure in plan B. Plan A is still really damn good. And that's the top 4 guys in the rotation and the top 4 guys in the bullpen kind of carrying the load. That's really good. That the Braves are in as good a spot as anybody. And you can look around baseball, knock on wood, the Braves have been relatively healthy this spring, especially in the pitching staff. They really haven't had anything significant pop up on that side of the ball. A lot of teams can't say that. I mean, my God, the American League East has been just ravaged with pitching injuries this spring, the Yankees specifically. So they've been relatively healthy. And if their top 4 guys in the bullpen and their top 4 guys in the rotation can carry the day, then that's fine. But remember, Spencer Strider's not going to be there for the first month. And, they're going to need multiple guys. Obviously, they're people that believe in Grant Holmes. I'm still not quite there with Grant Holmes, but I can be convinced very, very quickly, very easily if he proves the Braves right and as good as they think he is. So I don't want to paint too dire of a picture. I don't want to get crazy with this. There's a version where it doesn't hurt them at all, but there's also a version where it can get very bad because I think they've left themselves open to having a very questionable bullpen, and that's really the first time I could say that. Alex has always been so aggressive with that specific unit. This is one of the first times I can say I feel like they've left themselves open to being bad in that unit, and we'll just have to see which version of the bullpen starts the year. But there's a world where it's bad. There's also a world where it's good. But I think for the first time in a long time, I think there's almost as much of a chances of being either average or below average than there is it being good. And we're just not used to that with the Braves, with Alex Anthopoulos and the way he usually builds bullpens.
Yeah, and if you look at last year and say, look at all that we endured, we talk about plan A, plan B. Well, last year we were on plan G, H, G, H, I, F, J, K. You can go through the alphabet. We were on that plan, and we still made the playoffs. But the thing about it is with expanded playoffs, listen, and being a team that can still make a playoffs despite a lot of different things they're working through, to me, that's not that impressive. The Marlins made the playoffs as recently as 2023. There's a big difference between, you went through all this and you still made the playoffs versus what are you doing to be a legit World Series title contender? I expect for the Braves to be in the conversation of legit World Series title contenders, and I just feel that right now there's got to be a lot to go right for Atlanta than, we really had hoped for there to be. We want it to go right, obviously, but if it doesn't, the questions really become louder. And the other part of the equation when it comes to looking at the pitching side of things is the fifth starter spot, is the back end of the rotation. I think Grant Holmes has shown, I don't think that he's been just absolutely spectacular this spring. I think he's been steady. I think that he's been fine. I think Grant Holmes has been to the level of, every 3 to 4 out of 5 times he's on the mound, he's going to put the Braves in a position to win. He's already shown that he can do that. That's fine for me as a fourth or fifth starter. Anderson, have to hope that maybe he can get through the lineup 2 times in a game, not walk more than 5 people, and hopefully limit the opposition to 3 to 4 runs, and then the offense takes off, and he's put in a position to where he can help us win. That's not that confident, in my opinion, of a setup for the back end of the Braves rotation, especially, again, if we've talked multiple times this season about there being some legitimate questions about the top end of the Braves' current rotation.
Yeah, listen, in a lot of ways, it's going to come down to Grant Holmes because I do feel comfortable with Sale and Schwellenbach and Lopez. I know Lopez hasn't had a great spring, but somebody who is as veteran as he is, I really don't worry about it. I mean, I feel like once the season starts, he's just going to kind of get right back into regular season mode for him. So the top 3 I feel good about. I've gone on record. I am not an Ian Anderson believer. I know he's got a really low, he's got an ERA in the 2s this spring. But if you look at literally any other number that we judge pitchers by, FIP, xFIP, strikeout rate, walk rate, left on base percentage, batting average on balls, you look at any of that stuff, he's having a really bad spring. The only place he's not having a bad spring is ERA. And it's not even so much about the spring stats. It's just the process does not inspire any confidence. Like, he's not striking anybody out. He has very little command. Right now he's surviving because the opposition has like a batting average on balls in play that's like below 100. Well, everyone knows. This is kind of like the Bryce Elder thing from a couple of years ago. Like, everyone knows that there is nothing sustainable about pitching like that. It's just a matter of when it bites you. It's not if, it's just when. And so, like, when people see the ERA and like, whoa, Ian Anderson's having a great spring. He's just not. He's not having a great spring. He's having a relatively lucky spring relative to how all of his other peripherals look. And there's just nothing in his stuff, in his command, that inspires much confidence, quite honestly. but he's the fifth starter. So if Grant Holmes pitches well, then you can live with, like, if everybody else is good and Ian Anderson sucks, you can live with that until Spencer Strider gets back. You really can. I mean, there's a lot of good teams that don't have 5 good starters. So that's where Grant Holmes becomes so important, because if he's good, then it matters a lot less. And that's kind of what that's where it's going to come down to. Ian Anderson may surprise me and may come out and, I think his first game is going to be against the Dodgers. So we're going to find out very quickly, and he may surprise me, but I'm not a believer, but again, I can be convinced. But I think Grant Holmes is the linchpin of this. And if he comes out and has a good start to the year and can bridge the gap to Strider coming back, then a lot of my concerns go away. It's if both Anderson and Holmes are bad, and if the Braves are trying to do another kind of round of 6-man rotation where they use another guy on top of those two before you get back to the top of the rotation, that's where I get concerned. I just don't love the depth, if I'm being honest. I do like AJ Smith-Shawver. I'm much more of a believer in him than I am Ian Anderson, but yeah, I was hoping to add a starter in this offseason. That's what I was hoping. I was hoping they'd add somebody more proven, more, consistent than what they have now, and they didn't. So now we're kind of dealing with that.
Yeah, and the other thing that stands out to me is this. We've talked about the bullpen. We talked about the starting pitching. Orlando Arcia at the shortstop position is not having a great spring himself. I don't think that, if you were hoping for some type of, mini breakout from a Brian De La Cruz or a Jared Kelenic to show that they may be able to take on an everyday role in the outfield, we haven't seen that either. The point that I'm getting at, Stephen, we have not seen that unexpected, really positive development from a player so far this spring that we feel could fit a spot or fill a need unexpectedly. And we're in a position where we had really hoped that would emerge, but none of that has happened. I think that one of the biggest storylines of spring training so far is that has not happened. And again, we're sitting here talking about the same things that we've talked about time and time again this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how much you believe in Nick Allen, I guess. He's been the only one that's or Sandy Leone. Maybe you're a big Sandy Leone fan and you love how he leads the team in homers, but let's be honest, neither one of those guys is going to play. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they actually are, have Orlando Arcia in a competition for starting shortstop. I don't believe it. I think he's just going to be the starter. What you were really hoping for was somebody on the bullpen side, or maybe Ian Anderson, somebody to have a really explosive spring, a really, awe-inspiring spring, and it would make you feel better about some of the questions they had on that side of the ball. And that just hasn't happened. It doesn't mean they're going to be bad by any stretch. It doesn't mean that. But like you said, we just haven't there's no pleasant surprises, I guess is the easiest way to put it. There's been no oh my God, look at this guy. I knew he could be good, but man, he looks unbelievable. Again, it might not matter. The top end of this roster is so damn good. The top end of this roster is so unbelievably good. They got good news with the Jurickson Profar injury. It looks like he's going to be there for opening day. The top 15 guys on this roster are so unbelievably good. It might not matter. It really might. Those top 15 guys, until Strider and Acuna come back, could just carry the load, and nobody even notices anybody else on the roster. And if that happens, none of this matters. But if they get into a situation where a few guys start out cold, bad performances in April, and they actually do need those last 10 players on their roster, that's where I have concerns, because I love the roster through 1 through 15, 16. It's after that I have a lot of questions, and we'll just have to see if they need those guys. They might not. And if they don't, that would be fantastic. But yeah, we just haven't seen that really pleasant surprise come in spring training and take a job or answer a question that we had when we started this thing. It could still happen. The Braves could still make a move, by the way. They could still add somebody. They could trade, there's still guys on the fridge. Technically, they could still add. Every day it doesn't happen, it becomes less and less likely, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Well, I think the thing, though, and as we wrap up this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast, I think the full circle that we're kind of seeing comes back to what Alex Anthopoulos has positioned to be the calling card of this team, and that's the offense.
Yep.
And what I mean with that is the fact that, to your point, if the offense lives up to what it's capable of, a lot of these questions don't need to be asked. But one of three things has to happen, in my opinion. And when I say has to happen, I mean it has to happen, in my opinion, for us to get off the start that we want to. Number one, if we hit home runs at least a top of the league level, not saying historical level like we did in 2023, but at a top of the league level. That's one thing that really hampered us last year, was we just did not hit home runs at a consistent enough rate to hide our other deficiencies. If we hit home runs near the top of the league, I think we'll be fine. That's one. The second thing is, what if we, like we did in 2023, had a historic season when it came to first inning production? That puts our pitchers in such a better position when they're pitching with the lead. That really helps them out in being able to work through counts, trust their stuff, what have you. So starting off games, having offense get going early really, really helps out. The third thing is a massive improvement from where we regressed the most last year, and that's timely hitting with runners in scoring position, making the most of opportunities when runners are on base. If multiple of those three things, three aspects of our offense, wind up being in a good position, we could be in a really good spot to start the season. But if none of those things happen, then again, I don't think it's dire, but we potentially start putting ourselves in a hole to where it's going to be really hard to come out of, to be in a favorable position when it comes to the postseason. I think the Braves are going to make the postseason. I think they're one of the favorites in the National League. That's not going to change. But the point that I'm getting at is, all these questions that we have about other parts of the team, if the offense performs well, those questions become much, much less silent. But the need for the offense to perform well is a must. And if it doesn't, then you're probably going to see even more questions start to arise.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what do the best 15 players on this roster, which a lot of them are offensive players, do they carry the day? Do they carry most of the load? And if they do, this team could win 105 games. This team still has an absurd amount of talent. Just all of us still have PTSD from last year when so many of their best players didn't play well, and they had to lean on guys nobody was expecting to lean on. And we saw the up and down season they had. And so for a lot of us, we're like, well, if they have to do that again, if they have to lean on guys, well, the depth of this team, like the last 10 players on the roster, there's a lot of questions on those 10 guys, 11 guys. And so, like you just said, we just need Austin Riley and Matt Olson and Jurickson Profar and Michael Harris and Ozzie Albies. We need Marcelo Zuna. Those players need to be the Braves' best players. And Chris Sale and Schwellenbach and Lopez and Iglesias and Bummer. And if those guys are awesome, none of this matters. None of it matters. The Braves are going to win a ton of games. And that's before you even get Acuna and Strider back. If those guys struggle and now you're leaning more onto your depth like it happened most of last year, the questions are going to get louder because of how little the Braves did this offseason. And that's where we are. And we'll just see which version kicks off the year. And again, they may still add. We're not technically through the period of the winter or the spring where teams add. We're actually coming up on that now as guys don't win jobs with other clubs. They get released. The Braves are going to have a lot of 40-man shuffling to do when the season starts because of how many NRI guys they have and potentially are going to be on the roster. So I still think there's going to be a decent amount of shakeup, and they could add. But yeah, like you said, if the top of the roster does its job, most of these questions become substantially less important.
Absolutely. And again, putting faith in those guys, it's easy to do. It's just with a bit more caution because of last year and also kind of what we've seen as time has gone on. Steven, anything else from you as we wrap up this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast?
Nope. Selection Sunday is 3 days away. So can't wait. Braves obviously continuing spring training. If you missed, by the way, I do want to give a shout out to Brandon Gaulden, play-by-play guy for the Braves. He came on the podcast with Scott a couple of days ago. If you missed that, I think it's actually the last episode in the feed. So if you
Yeah.
missed that episode, Brandon, gave us like a 40-minute interview, talked about a wide range of stuff. Brandon's actually been on the show a couple times, so big shout out to him. We really
Great
appreciate the
guy.
time. Great
Absolutely great
guy.
guy. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he's a lifelong Braves fan. I play-by-play guys can sometimes it can be a thankless job, and you get a lot of criticism. I think he's done an incredible job since he's
Yes.
been the main guy. I thoroughly enjoy Braves broadcasts, which I couldn't always say before Brandon got there. So big shout out to him, and to come on the show. And for anybody else, if you're just now finding us, obviously it's me and Sean and Brad and Scott are the 4-man team, and we'll be here all season and all hopefully postseason, and then all winter, and then all spring, and then all season. It's a 365-day podcast. We give content every week, usually 3 or 4 times a week. So make sure you're subscribed, and we appreciate the last 2 months have been some of our biggest shows, biggest weeks, biggest months ever. You guys have been incredible, even though it wasn't the busiest off season for the Braves. You guys were incredible. So big thank you to the fans, and season's coming. So I'm unbelievably excited.
Absolutely. And we love the support because I feel like that there is a connection there because, the folks who are kind enough to listen to this podcast, support this podcast, they're just like us in terms of the fact they're listening for the same reason that we're creating the content. We love the Braves, and that's why we're here. And we'll continue to obviously talk about them. And hey, when we get to talking about games, that's when it gets about as good as it can get. For Stephen Tolbert, you can find him at B_Outliers on Twitter/X. My name's Shawn Coleman at StatsSAC on Twitter/X. You can find Foul Territory across all forms of social media, part of the Hammer Territory across all forms of social media, part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts. So many great podcasts out there on Foul Territory. Make sure to check out each and every one of them. Until next time, go Braves. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory podcast.